are being killed. School children are being raided and killed. And I don't even want to say how, but as viciously as I've ever heard. Are you uncomfortable? No, that's the part of the world that I know. Very comfortable. Was able to get them together and sell it. And not only that, we're getting for the United States a lot of the mineral rights from the Congo as part of it. They're so honored to be here. They never thought they'd be coming to. Look, this is a very tough part of the world. They never thought, they were just telling me, they never thought they'd ever be coming to the White House, and they're so honored. And so we're going to give them a great big reception. But that's after many years of fighting. It's a great thing. That's at 3 o'clock, I believe.
Congo to sell minimal rights to the United States. Structured as a peace deal, but we know there's more to it. Welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where it's a collaborative effort between Authentic African and the Gloria Ayo. We break down this week's breaking news and the impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. Today, we dive into the corporate conquest, the quote-unquote peace deal, securing quote-unquote Congo's peace between the DRC and Rwanda. But before we get into today's stories, we'll do some introductions. I'll turn it over to my co-host to introduce herself, and then I will introduce myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the creator of The African Story, also the host of The African Story, and just very passionate about all things Africa, getting Africa where it needs to be. Very happy to be back. Hi, Joe.
Welcome back, and I'm happy to have you. I am Joe Hatagwa, the founder of AuthenticAfrican.com, e-commerce site that sources ethically sourced products from the continent of Africa, handmade baskets, instruments, all kinds of different things made on the continent for distribution globally. I also run Authentic African, the social media platform meant to bridge the gap between Africans on the continent and living in the diaspora, with the ultimate goal of getting people to do three things on the continent: visit, invest, and or potentially move to the continent. So with that, we are going to get into today's story. So again, the headline story today is basically trading blood for batteries. This is the mineral deal that the United States is doing with the DRC under the guise of a peace deal. We're going to go over a ton of different stories today. That's the top story. We'll also be going through the Kenya protest update. There's some updates that we want to talk about. Togo's dictatorship and Uganda's president running for re-election after 40 plus years in power. Then we have a number of other stories around the continent that we'll go through. So let's get right into the first story. So I think many of you probably have seen the very viral videos of Trump and or Marco Rubio and friends, along with, I think they're the foreign ministers of both the DRC and Rwanda. And they were at the White House. And as you saw in that opening video, Trump mentions that there is a mineral deal. So let me just kind of give you guys some background, and then we will get into the video that kind of talks a little bit more about this. So the DRC Rwanda peace deal, formerly known as the Critical Minerals for Security and Peace Deal, is a U.S. brokered agreement that aims to address both ongoing violence in Eastern DRC and the region's vast mineral wealth. The deal is historic in its ambition to stabilize a region that has suffered decades of conflict, with over 6 million folks who have experienced loss of life since the 1990s, largely fueled by competition over minerals such as coltan, cobalt, lithium, copper, and gold resources vital for global tech and defense industries. The question is this a sellout for minerals, or is it a real peace deal? So the evidence of mineral sellout. The U.S. strategic interest, the U.S. has openly linked its mediation to securing access to DRC's critical minerals, with President Trump and senior advisors stating that the deal will bring, quote unquote, a lot of mineral rights from the Congo to the U.S. and American investors. Critics argue that it continues a historical pattern of foreign exploitation of Congo's resources, raising fears of neo-colonialism and extraction-focused investment rather than true development. You guys might remember that there had been talks a few months ago about arming the Congo in exchange for minerals. In this case, instead of arming the Congo's government or the military in exchange for minerals, the conversation is a little bit more about a peace deal in exchange for minerals. So the other concerns is that analysts and civil society warn that focusing on minerals could overshadow the root causes of the conflict: militia proliferation, ethnic grievances, and weak governance, potentially perpetuating cycles of violence if deeper issues are not addressed. There's also exclusion of key actors, as usual. The main rebel group M23, which controls key mining areas, was not direct party in negotiations and has indicated it's not ready to disarm, casting doubt on enforceability of the deal. So the key risks and realities is the root cause is unsolved, as I mentioned, and implementation doubts are there. As I mentioned, the exclusion of M23 and the complexity of regional politics means that the deal's success is far from guaranteed. Previous agreements have failed when not all stakeholders were included or when economic interests took precedence over justice and reconciliation. So we'll get into a video and we'll have some thoughts on the other side.
Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have signed a peace deal aimed at ending the devastating conflict in Eastern DRC. The United States and Qatar brokered the deal, which President Trump touted as a wonderful treaty. The hope is it will end a 30-year conflict. The Congolese foreign minister and Rwandan foreign minister signed the deal together in D.C. before meeting with the president.
So, your thoughts, Gloria, on this quote-unquote peace deal?
Anyway, it's no news that the DRC holds over 70% of the world's cobalt reserves, and that for over a century, Congo's mineral wealth has never truly served the Congolese people. Since the days of King Leopold II of Belgium running Congo as his personal colony, pretending to bring civilization while brutally extracting ivory and rubber. So Congo's economic structure has remained extractive since then. Matter of fact, these minerals meant to bless Congo have felt like a curse. Patrice Lumumba would have been 100 years old yesterday, July 2nd. He had pushed to nationalize Congo's mineral wealth and keep decision-making in African hands. We know how tragically that ended. Mobutu Sese Seko, who overthrew and unalived Lumumba, then enforced policies that would allow foreign companies continue access to minerals in exchange for political support. So every shift in leadership since, from Laurent Kabila to Joseph Kabila, has been shaped by who controls Congo's minerals and who benefits from them. This deal with Trump seems to offer a path to stability, but some would argue that peace is way more important. You talked about the exclusion of M23. If they are controlling, if these people are still armed and they're in mineral-rich areas, and they're not, and I'm not trying to excuse what they're doing or justify what they're doing, but it seems like, for the optics, perhaps they excluded them because including them would probably be an admission by Rwanda that they are actually behind M23. But not including them could also set a very dangerous precedent in that, diplomatically and structurally, it's just not a good look. They are present, like I said, in mineral-rich areas. So making them a central actor, or noting that they are a central actor in the instability going on in the region is actually the first step. When you leave them out, the deal addresses the political surface, but you're not dealing with the military and economic reality on the ground. So the unrest may continue whether or not Trump is involved. But all that said, the big question is it's not about whether or not we desire peace. We want peace. Absolutely. We actually want peace, but we don't just want the illusion of peace. But the peace is for whom? Is it the peace for miners? Is it for the mothers? Is it for displaced children in Eastern Congo? Or is it for investors and diplomats from big countries, such as the US?
Yeah, that's a great point. you think about it, right? As with many of the deals that the Trump administration is working on, they have a lot to do with the rare earth, which is what he was describing when he was talking about the Ukraine, right? Rare earth. And I think what he means is rare earth materials, right? You know, the Ukraine dealings had to do with rare earth materials. The conversations with the Congo have to do with that. The new deal with China has to do with rare earth materials. So, you know, obviously, if you want to do a deal like this, you don't want to have investors going into a conflict-ridden area. And so it seems as if the United States is basically prioritizing the health and wealth of Americans looking to do business in the DRC, as opposed to changing or at least having an assisting in aiding the real peace deals across all the groups that are involved. And as you mentioned, M23, the UN has said the M23 rebels have been not only financed but also trained by Rwanda, and specifically the leadership of Rwanda and the Rwanda military. And so if that's the case, you know, as you mentioned, that may be why they weren't involved in these discussions, or publicly mentioned being involved in these discussions. But I mean, they have to be an important party in this conversation, because if they, like you said, if they're overseeing key areas where, you know, a lot of the minerals are, you know, obviously you're going to need to deal with them. It's the same way with Afghanistan, where the Afghanistan government was left out of discussions and was only and the U.S. government was only communicating with the Taliban, or they were having conversations separately instead of bringing all parties to the table. You know, a real peace deal requires all folks who are responsible for the loss of life in country. And if you only have a portion of the folks involved in those discussions, you're not truly going to be able to bring peace. So I definitely think that there's more work to be done there. And I think many people are skeptical that this deal is actually going to mean anything, even for American investors. It's unlikely that those investors that they're looking to try to make an easy path for them to get rare earth minerals, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to do that outside of what's already happening, which has been going on for, you know, you mentioned the extraction of the minerals for over 100 years. And now with these specific rare earth minerals for today's technology, for at least the last 60. So with that, I'm going to play one more video, just speaking to Trump's response, and then we'll give some commentary on the other side.
Very severe penalties, financial and otherwise.
Can you share with us what can happen if one of the parts violate this peace agreement? Because we don't want war to come back to DRC.
I'd rather not say. I would just say that there are big penalties if they violate, and they're not going to. I don't think they will violate. I think they mean it, but we have very severe penalties, financial and otherwise.
Thoughts on the very severe penalties?
Okay, but why must Africa? First of all, of course, this is the big elephant in the room. Why must Africa go to the West for African peace? Angola was directly involved with the Luanda roadmap, but that didn't work out. Why couldn't we find other Africans to broker peace? I mean, people like Mahama from Ghana come to mind.
Yep.
Keep in mind that Tshisekedi was the one who asked the U.S. to get involved. After all, Trump had told us he didn't know what Congo was. Remember that?
Yep.
So now Trump is actually, you can hear the boast, you know, him boasting rather, of how they came to him, and they're so happy to be in the White House, and they never thought this day would come. Bro, you are giving away minerals, and you're talking about how happy you are to be at the White House?
Right.
The truth is that real peace can only be African-led. No foreign power, no matter how well-intentioned, can substitute for African ownership of African problems. Non-African powers can give their support. They can provide resources or diplomatic backing, but when they take over the process, they also take control of the outcome, and that's exactly what we're seeing.
Well put. I really don't have anything else to add. I think we've covered it all. I think the last thing I'll say to tie a bow on this is, you know, just think about it this way. And, you know, I will say for those watching, You know, I am a proud American citizen to have my, you know, my blue passport. So, but I will say this, you know, anytime the United States is involved in any foreign affairs where there is a conflict, you better believe that there is a benefit to the United States, right? When there are conflicts happening and there's no benefit, America does not get involved. So when it comes, yeah, when it comes to talking about human rights violations, and it depends on how we get involved, right? Sometimes we get involved militarily in order to continue the human rights violations. You guys decide what countries I'm talking about there. Sometimes we get involved militarily to stop quote unquote human rights violations. And in that case, that would be to overthrow someone who the United States does not prefer to be in office, and to replace them with someone else they do prefer. With regime change, you can decide on what countries we're talking about there. We could say specifically in Africa, you've already mentioned an example of where that's happened. And so just know that this wasn't about DRC and Rwanda peace. This was about U.S. interest in what's under the ground in the DRC. So just want to say that to tie a bow on it. There were some thoughts here. So Roy Marshall says, after 30 years and 6 million with loss of life, it was obvious that Africans needed outside assistance for some sort of end this slaughter. Do you expect other countries to help Rwanda, Congo for nothing? So Roy, I'll take a shot at this, and then I'd love to hear your thought. So I would say first things first is, do we really think that this is going to be a real peace deal? Right? Like, let me ask you, Roy, if you really think that this is going to lead to peace. You think that that's going to really happen? Because the United States doesn't have a track record of having peaceful transitions or leading to peace. We've done more destruction, unfortunately, than peace in most of the countries we get involved. Ask Afghanistan, ask Iraq, ask Iran, right? When the United States gets involved, it doesn't usually end in peace. So just be clear on that. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, but I'd love to get.
Well, I mean, you've said it all. Yeah, we do need assistance, but why do we have to go outside the continent? I stand on the heel of Africa being equipped enough to be self-sufficient. We don't need to go outside Africa to get help for anything. Have you heard or seen people from Africa and how they think? Africa has some of the most intelligent people on earth. Quote me anywhere. So we don't need to go outside and get people to come solve our problems for us. Of course, yes. Why should we be giving away our minerals for somebody to help us with peace? Why can't we be peaceful among ourselves?
Yeah, and Roy, for the second comment and point that you made here, think about how long the U.S. and French and German and Italian and other militaries have been in Africa to quote unquote impact a negative or to stave off and to stop the terrorist groups that are around the continent of Africa, and how helpful that has been. Ask the AES how helpful those French troops have been. They haven't really done much to quell and to stop these terrorist groups. So now you are conflating a couple different things. You're saying Islamic colonization versus the 34,000 verified Muslim terrorist attacks. I think they're two different things, right? We can talk about people's religion and those who are technically in power, and then we can also talk about these insurgent groups, these groups that are or terrorist groups that are out there committing these atrocities. Those are two different things, and those who are committing the atrocities have not been stopped by foreign intervention. In fact, they've grown. So the numbers that you're talking about, these verified attacks, are under the watch of foreign intervention. So if that didn't work, why do you think that American troops now in the DRC and Rwanda is going to have any difference? So you're speaking about the challenges and the numbers, but this is with Western influence and troops on the ground, and you're still getting these numbers. So that's why I think what we're talking about is an African solution to African problems, right? That's what is necessary, because what we've had so far has not worked. And so I think when Gloria is talking about the fact that Africa keeps going to the West for help, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And the results have not changed. So why would we continue to do the same thing? I don't know if you have any more thoughts on this particular.
Yeah, and I do get why people like Roy would say Africa needs outside help for peace in the Congo, especially given how prolonged and complicated this conflict is. But we do have to be honest about why that help is often needed. Much of the instability in Congo and across the region can be traced back to external interference in the first place, from colonial exploitation under King Leopold II to Cold War era proxy battles. The scramble for minerals today, foreign involvement hasn't helped in any way. It's failed to bring peace. It's deepened the wounds, and peace in Congo will only be sustainable if it's rooted in African agency. If groups like M23 can be held accountable, you know, relying on this help from the US or wherever often means that foreign powers come in prioritizing their own strategic or economic interests, whether it's for cobalt, copper, or regional, or even if all they want is influence. We've seen this cycle before. So no, Africa doesn't need help in the sense of dependency. What it needs is for external actors to stop fueling instability behind the scenes, and for African states to strengthen their own mechanisms, to be able to trust in themselves, to be able to invest in long-term solutions that center the Congolese people, not outside people from outside coming in to help us. Peace is possible, but it has to be earned on Africa's terms, not least through some partnership in the US that is definitely going to come with strings. So why even go that route?
Well put. And there's a couple of comments from Instagram that I do want to cover just to make sure we get those comments up. So, you know, ATUN2 Sirius says, and that's why the U.S. wants these minerals to help other countries and to be involved with other countries. I'm not going to say which ones they said. Africans don't need to knock on U.S. door for support. This is AMSW. AMSW says, I won't read that one actually. Lady Jane 57 says, this is not peace. This is an opportunity for the U.S. to take the minerals for little in return. Africa has to start thinking of the long game and not immediate gratification for their leaders. Well put. I think everybody agrees with that sentiment. And that's how you have the leadership in the AES that you have for that same reason. I think many Africans feel the same way. Okay, with that, we are going to shift gears from the discussion around that particular peace deal to move on to the updates of what's been happening in Kenya and the protests in Kenya. The first story is the gentleman, Boniface, who was selling masks at the original protests earlier in the month, last month. He has now been pronounced, he's moved on. And so we are going to get into the story and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
There is some breaking news that's coming to us now that Boniface Mwangi Kariuki, who's the hawk, the hawker, I should say, the masked hawker, has now been confirmed to be dead. His family has confirmed to the Nation Media Group via phone, and this is the gentleman who was shot by a police officer last week and has been at the Kenyatta National Hospital, where he's undergone a few surgeries to the head. He was shot at close range and was caught on camera, and he was yesterday, according to his family, this family spokesperson, as at yesterday, he had been declared brain dead. And so the family had been looking into the different legal dynamics of what it would mean to move forward with either getting him off life support or what their options are. But just this afternoon, the family has confirmed that Boniface Mwangi Kariuki has been confirmed dead.
So we reported on this, was it last week, when we discussed what was happening with the Kenya protest. What are your thoughts here on this particular story and the passing of Boniface?
It's just so heartbreaking because this was a man who wasn't, okay, even if the excuse was, oh, they're disturbing the peace, there's anarchy. This was a man who was not disturbing the peace. This was a young man selling masks. He wasn't with a weapon. He was not a rioter. That was premeditated. It was deliberate, you know. He wasn't armed. All he was doing was trying to earn a living, even with everything going on with the unemployment rate, with the chaos happening. And what has happened to him is, it further proves and shows what happens when you have a government that has chosen to respond to civil dissent with the language of force. It's just so sad.
I like how you said that, chosen to respond to civil dissent with the language of force. And I think that really speaks to what we're going to talk about in a moment. But yeah, I mean, what you see is this rhetoric, and I was not as aware of this. I'm glad you put it on my radar, that the politicians in Kenya give license to the police to act the way they do, because you kind of wonder how this happens, right? The way they go about hunting people down. You guys saw the video from last week, right? How we opened with that video where, you know, one of the police officers shot a person, and then you saw that person unalived, and then someone else running away, and they kind of, you know, hunted them. They like ran after them and shot at them and unalived that person as well. And you kind of wonder where that comes from. And, you know, I think what I want to do is maybe jump to a video, because you made a great point of one of the leaders talking, and you kind of get an idea of why people the police have been responding the way they do. So the Interior Minister ordered police to shoot anybody approaching a police station, basically manufacturing consent for extrajudicial unalivings under the guise of protecting armories. Police lied that a teacher had unalived himself in a jail cell. So what stops them from lying again? The same minister told the Senate recently that he doesn't have the power to order police. But what changed? So let's watch this video. We'll give some thoughts on the other side.
Na tumeambia polisi, mtu yoyote mwenye atakaribia police station, piga yeye risasi. Mtu yoyote.
So, I mean, obviously, this is not in English, so it's hard to understand, but you got the idea, right? And you could hear the crowd responding, right? So, you know, obviously there was the general public that was there listening to this speech. And when they heard that, you heard their audible disagreement with what he was saying. Gloria, since you were the one who brought this to my attention, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And yeah, just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there should never be a breakdown of law and order. That will never be acceptable, not anywhere, not in Kenya, not in any society that calls itself free. In any democracy, the police should be a tool of protecting the people, protecting public safety. They should be neutral guardians of the law. They're not supposed to be a tool of fear. But when they become an extension of political power, then you have true anarchy. There will never be any justification for a statement like that being made by a minister or by any member of government. I don't care if it's curfew violations. I don't care if people damage property. I don't even care if people are angry in the streets. Execution is not law enforcement. Shooting an unarmed protester is not crowd control. It's state violence. And when it is carried out systematically, when it's carried out repeatedly, you're basically sending out a message to silence protesters through terror. It's not acceptable. We will not stand for it.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree. I think that the issue that we're seeing here is you have a disgruntled police force already. People are hungry, people are upset, and it's easy to take to violence when you're already dissatisfied with what's been happening in the status quo. And this is just giving license to turn that anger on the people who have nothing to do with why you're upset, right? It's really from the government. But this is what we see many places around the world, where those who are in power turn people against each other. So the fighting happens with the people against each other and not against those who are subjugating them in the first place. There's a question that came up, which I thought was interesting. Toon Ray says, peace family, just came to YouTube from Instagram side. My question to you is why is there no political party for Africans of the diaspora and back home to support and vote? So one thing I will say is you have to be a citizen of any country to vote. That's number one, right? So, you know, many of us are maybe not dual citizens. I happen to be a dual citizen, so I can vote in 2 countries. I can vote in Sierra Leone, I can vote in the United States, and maybe eventually I'll be able to vote in Ghana. Fingers crossed. But you know, it's not so simple, right? You have to be a citizen of that country to vote. Now, in terms of getting people out to vote, there are many different parties, and you know, there's a couple of parties that I don't want to misquote or say the names incorrectly, so I'll put them in the description. But you guys know when we used to go live with African Stream, Inem Richardson always talked about the different political parties that she was a part of, and they were all focused on Pan-Africanism. So I will definitely put those in the description, put links to those in the description if you want to support any party that's focused on Pan-Africanism and the education of the young people on the continent, etc. There's definitely paths to do so. But as far as voting in other countries, you have to be a citizen of that other country to vote, right? And so if you guys feel so strongly about that, you'd have to go through that process. Many countries, it's a very difficult process. The countries I've mentioned have systems in place, whether there are executive orders and or they have other systems to allow you to do that. Burkina Faso is looking like they're doing a citizenship program. Obviously, Ghana has some sort of a citizenship program that they're accelerating for some folks through executive order. Sierra Leone has one for people of West African descent. But like if you're talking about Kenya and other countries, they have their own citizenship process, and it's a long, arduous process. So it's not as easy as that. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on this one, but I just thought it was important to mention this.
I think you've said it all.
Okay.
Well,
all right. So with that, and there are some other comments on some of the earlier stories, but we want to move on because we definitely are limited on time. So I just want to get to this last story. And this one is about the government propaganda in Kenya. You know, what we found is that, and, you know, this is, you know, thanks to Gloria for looking into this, but there have been plenty of requests from the government to crowdsource propaganda. And it seems to be pretty successful, to be honest. So to give you an example of some of the things that the government is asking people to include or to share, I want to share this. So this was set out: violence steals jobs, peace protects them. So what they're doing is, obviously with any protests, there are going to be bad actors that join those protests. Generally, not the folks that are peacefully protesting. You know, I can't give you a percentage of the time, but, you know, I would say at least 80% of the time, the folks that are doing the destruction are either sponsored by an outside group, or they're just people who decide to show up because they're angry about something and it gives them an opportunity to do something. But this is something that the government of Kenya has been putting out on social media. There were hashtags around it: Stop the Anarchy, etc. So this is basically what they're doing to crowdsource propaganda. So let me get to a video that basically dives a little bit deeper, asking for the assistance of the general public to come in and offer more content so they can use to kind of continue their propaganda against the protest.
Was your business destroyed during the protests? Help us document the damage. Take a video of the destruction. Show us what happened. Make sure to include your location. Then post it online using the hashtag receipts of distraction. Your video could be the proof that gets justice. Let's make every case count.
Dante ndo alinipigia akaniambia umelala na kwako kunavunjwa. Kazi ni kwa tu kuharibu na kuvunja.
We got the idea there. So government propaganda using what's happening here in these incidents to try to galvanize the public against the protests. Your thoughts, Gloria?
Yeah, first of all, my condolences to people who've lost things, properties, people who genuinely lost things, properties, business, whatever it is. That can never be cool. It reminds me of the Rodney King riot that happened in Los Angeles, and how I think California lost, was it $1 billion or something like that? yeah, it was, and this isn't to justify destruction of properties, but this is what happens when you have a government, or when you have, in the case of Rodney King, it was police brutality that led to what happened. These are things that could come from it. And this is why the governments have to do the right thing to protect the people in the first place. Throughout African history, governments have used this playbook now to the claims by the government. They've used this playbook of gaslighting the people, if you will. Of course, we know the pattern in South Africa during apartheid, with protesters being seen as threats to national security. And then to have our own governments, indigenous African governments, calling protesters anarchists is only a way to what's the word I'm looking for? Delegitimize dissent by framing it as dangerous and then responding with force. The right to protest should not morph into the right to destroy, but the power of the state must also not transform into the right to execute. There is no legal, political, or moral justification for using live ammunition against unarmed civilians. And this online propaganda, which you pointed out, because we did a deep research on this, hashtags receipt of destruction, hashtag stop the anarchy, this online propaganda campaign under these hashtags, they look like a call for peace, but it's basically a way to shift blame for state violence onto protesters. So it looks as if the government is not shooting citizens, but what they're doing is basically defending Kenya. It's just for the optics. Calling it terrorism is especially dangerous. If peaceful protest is now terrorism, what becomes of democracy? It criminalizes ordinary citizens who all they're asking for is for their government to do right by them. So instead of giving the reforms they're asking for, you're worried about the optics, and you're more focused on invoking fear. It raises a lot of questions.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, we did do some research on this, and I neglected to share it earlier when I was talking about this. But here's some of what you're seeing under the receipts of destruction hashtag. So you can see here that this is, I mean, and you know, if you're going to use government propaganda to try to get people on your side, this is the way they do it. And this is actually well orchestrated. Although we disagree with what they're doing, they found a way to galvanize some of the public to get folks to get involved. As you mentioned, during the LA riots of the early 1990s, after everything that happened there was two moments, right? There was the unaliving of the young lady who was at a corner store by the woman who and the family who ran the corner store. And then there was the Rodney King beating shortly thereafter. And, you know, there was, oh, by the way, and that woman did not get any real jail time, right? She unalived a young girl, a promising young girl. And then the Rodney King beating happened immediately after. And then almost shortly thereafter, there was the O.J. Simpson trial, which is why I think the public was fed up with how the police and the government were handling these unalivings and or severe beatings of Black people in the streets, that they rejoiced in the exoneration of a murderer, or likely a murderer, right? And I mean, I can't. He was obviously, deemed not guilty, but I think that was just Johnny Cochran's good defense. I think he not did it. He was involved, but yeah, I mean, that was all. And what you had was these LA riots that, over $1 billion in destruction, and that happened because of the situation and the circumstances that put those people there. So it really is unfortunate that there's this damage that happens to the very people who are in the same community as the people who have been subjugated that led to this. But that is a byproduct of a government and a system that leads to those kinds of protests in the first place. And so, I think that the government of Kenya, what they're doing here is, I think it's a dirty trick, but, they're using every possible thing in their power to ensure that they get people on their side, because, how else can you justify the unaliving of people, hunting people down and shooting them in broad daylight without trying to use something else to get people on your side? With that, we will pivot to a couple of more stories that we wanted to call out directly because on the continent, we see very frequently, and you know, African Stream did a great story about this, about some of the leaders on the continent, how long they've been in power, right? I think it was William who reported on this, and he kind of went through the list of folks that have been in power over 30 years. And there were like honorable mentions, people that have been in power 15, 20 years. And they find ways around their country's constitution in order to stay in power. So we got two stories that are along those lines. And the first of which is in Togo, which there have been protests and also some destruction happening there as well. So we'll get to this and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Several people were killed during anti-government demonstrations in Togo last week, said human rights activists who also accused security forces of using, quote, shocking violence against protesters. The protest began last Thursday as people took to the streets to call for the resignation of longtime leader Faure Gnassingbé amid what government critics called a cost of living crisis. A joint statement by 12 Togolese civil society and human rights groups accused security forces of carrying out arbitrary arrests, beating civilians with batons and ropes, and of stealing and destroying private property. The statement said 3 bodies, including 2 minors, were found in a lagoon east of Lomé, and 2 more in a lake in one of the capital's districts on Friday. Another 2 bodies were found in another Lomé district on Saturday. A government statement dated Sunday acknowledged bodies were recovered from the lagoon and the lake, but said the deaths were due to drowning. The protests are a part of ongoing political turmoil in Togo. In May, Gnassingbé took the powerful new role of President of the Council of Ministers, which has no fixed term limits. Civil society groups described the move as another indication of democratic backsliding in West Africa.
Gloria, your thoughts? We reported on Togo recently, and now here we are with another Togo story.
Oh, yeah. So you see why I wasn't impressed when we talked about Togo joining the Alliance of Sahel States?
If they do join it, right?
Right. They can't, or them, you know, the rumors being put out there that they were considering it.
Right. At
this point, you can join the Alliance of Heavenly Angels for all I care, but I will never endorse what his family has done to Togo. Faure Gnassingbé came to power in 2005 after the death of his father. And his father had ruled Togo for 38 years, making him one of Africa's longest serving leaders. So his father actually came in through the 1963 coup, where Togo's first president, Sylvanus Olympio, was assassinated. So it already started on the wrong note. And then after his father's death, the military installed him as president, bypassing the constitutional line of succession. Massive protest is not today Togolese people are protesting. Massive protest, international pressure forced him to resign then, and then he decided to stand for election. But of course, the election, which was in 2005, was marred by violence. There were allegations of fraud. Over 500 people were unalived in the violence that came from that election. Yet he remained in power. Elections since then, 2010, 2015, 2020, have all been contested by opposition parties and people talking about vote rigging and intimidation, yet he's still in power. Now, the 2024 constitutional reforms were rewritten quietly. There was no referendum. There was no national consensus. You see how African leaders use legal frameworks to extend their stay in power, as you mentioned. In 2017, thousands protested for term limits and electoral reform, saying Faure must go. Does that sound familiar? Ruto must go. That movement was violently suppressed and there was a crackdown. But today's protests are different. These people are younger, they're more decentralized, they're less partisan. Many of those protesters today were only children when Faure took power. So just imagine the fact that they've not known any other leader but this man. So now they're mobilizing on the internet. And just like Ruto, Faure has accused protesters of anarchy and spreading disinformation. And of course, in all of this, and this brings me back to the Trump story on the peace deal, where's the African Union in all of this? Where is ECOWAS regarding what's going on with Togo? They keep quiet. When there's constitutional coup, they're quiet. They treat it with less urgency than military coups. When soldiers take power, they're condemned, but when presidents quietly remove term limits, they're left alone.
Great point. And you can imagine why, right? I mean, if you can do it yourself, they would, and they're hoping to be able to do it, right? So like you said, when there's constitutional coups, they keep quiet. And they have on many occasions. They continue to happen, right? But when, as you said, when there's a military coup, then they get nervous, because then it could potentially happen to them. I'm interested to see with new leadership in ECOWAS if that changes. And with that, we'll move on. So a couple other things. So I will say the All-African People's Revolutionary Party was the name of the political party that I was looking for that I could not remember for the life of me. But I now remember it. So if you guys just type in All-African People's Revolutionary Party, I did put that in the comments. So for the person, the commenter who asked that question earlier, they have social media handles that you can follow what they're up to. You can go to their website and sign up for their newsletter and follow what they're up to. If that is of interest to you, again, it's the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Okay, and to the last major story that we're going to cover around the topic of remaining in power is Uganda's Museveni, who's been in power for over 40 years, and he has recently announced he is going to run for re-election. This is the constitutional surprise, right? Surprise, surprise. So this is the constitutional coups that Gloria was referencing earlier. So let's get to this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Uganda's longtime ruler, Yoweri Museveni, says he intends to run again in next year's presidential election. The 80-year-old has been in office since 1986, when he seized power after a 5-year civil war. The ruling party's amended the constitution twice in the past to allow Museveni to extend his rule. His closest opponents expected to be the singer-turned-politician Bobi Wine, who says he was rigged out of the victory in 2021 presidential elections, which were marred by violence. Arkham Webb is following developments from Nairobi in neighbouring Kenya.
President Museveni will have been in power for 40 years by the time the next elections take place in January next year. And for more than 20 years, there's been visible and growing discontent with his rule, particularly in urban areas, Kampala, the capital, and other towns and cities, and particularly among young people.
Okay, so, you know, we've talked about Bobi Wine and Museveni's, what was this, his son's bodyguard. Oh, sorry, was it Bobi Wine's bodyguard was taken into custody by Museveni's son?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously, they're using every tactic possible to stop the competition from gaining power and from winning. You know, I know a couple people who are Ugandan citizens who really wanted Bobi Wine in power, and they got Museveni again, and they're hoping that Bobi Wine can win the next election, but it seems unlikely considering how Museveni has really rigged it in his favor. But any thoughts on Museveni announcing he's gonna run for re-election? The shocking news.
Shocking. From one dynasty to another. Togo to Uganda. You know, in Togo, the father passed it on to his son, and now this man is likely to pass it to his son. His son is patiently waiting to take over from him. Of course, the announcement is unsurprising to me and definitely unsurprising to many Ugandans. And what this will do, as has been established, is it would extend his presidency to over 4 decades, making him one of the longest serving leaders, not just in Africa, but throughout the world. And at 81 years old, Museveni thinks he's so fit to keep leading Uganda. You know, the irony is that he was widely praised as a reformist when he first came in. He promoted market liberalization. He fought HIV/AIDS with transparency. He was seen as part of a new wave of African leaders. He even publicly condemned presidents for life, warning against the dangers of clinging to power. This was the old Museveni. But over time, he became even worse than that which he criticized. In 2005, Uganda's parliament, of course, dominated by Museveni's party, amended the constitution to remove presidential term limits. In 2017, the age limit, which used to be 75, was also scrapped, which was so convenient. And so that cleared the path for his 2021 re-election bid. There were mass arrests, there was internet shutdown, there was repression of opposition, most notably Bobi Wine. And there were credible allegations of ballot manipulation. So there is a pattern across Africa where leaders who once fought for liberation end up becoming enslavers. Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, who ruled for 37 years. Paul Biya of Cameroon, who's still in power since 1982. Nguema of Equatorial Guinea. And it's sad that 75% of Ugandans have never known any other president. And this man, as I said, is clearly setting up his son to replace him. No leader, however foundational, is irreplaceable. And no system that depends on one man or his family is going to endure.
Well put. I have nothing else to add. I will just say, let's hope for Bobby Wine. That's what the Ugandan people want. So let's see. Fingers crossed. All right. So we're going to get to some of these Africa Briefs headlines from around Africa quickly, talking about them and giving you guys the opportunity to look them up on your own. So first, Liberian president who was unalived in a coup gets a state funeral. Any updates you want to give on that?
Yes, so this is long overdue. There's going to finally be a state funeral for President William R. Tolbert Jr., who was assassinated during the 1980 military coup led by Samuel Doe. Excuse me. Tolbert, who led the country from 1971 until his death, was actually buried in a mass grave, and there was no official recognition for decades. So finally honoring him with a formal ceremony shows that Liberia is, trying to reconcile with its violent political past. And actually, I think more importantly, restore dignity to a man who many now see as a reformer, but was taken down too soon.
There it is. And then the monkeypox crisis. I've talked about this on my own separate live stream because Sierra Leone had seen an increase in cases, now recently a decrease in cases in monkeypox. It's kind of, it's gone through ebbs and flows throughout history. In the 70s, I think, is when it was first really widespread. And then it kind of had gone, underground for a while, but now it's making a resurgence around the continent. And it seems like many of the cases have actually been coming from Europe, by the way. But anyway, any thoughts on the crisis deepening across the continent of Africa amid aid cuts?
Yes, so new outbreaks have been reported in Central and West Africa. And there are concerns that international neglect, the aid cuts, as we all know about that, we've talked about on this show, could make this a full-blown public health crisis. My concern is how we tend to want to respond, to maybe help Africa in the interest of protecting ourselves in the West, for instance, because Mpox only gained serious attention after cases appeared in Western nations, yet it's been endemic in parts of Africa for decades. So our fingers crossed, that this ends, but we don't want people coming to rush to Africa to help Africa because you have interest to protect. If you're going to help Africa, which I don't believe Africa needs aid, but if you're going to assist Africa, then do it because you truly care. But is there such a thing?
Right, exactly. Now, there is also news that Trump is likely to host his first African summit of his term.
Yes. So Trump has announced plans to host his first Africa summit. You can see a renewed interest in Africa ahead of the, I think this is just me. I think Trump is softening now more towards Africa. I'm hearing more of a respectful tone. I don't know if what's going on with old dude, Elon Musk, is he's threatened to deport Elon, but whatever. But anyway, I don't know if now he's deciding to just see Africa for himself. I mean, the comment to the reporter who he talked about how beautiful she was. I mean, those are just almost as if it was surprised to see such a beauty come out of Africa. Bro, we have many of them, and of course she is beautiful. But I'm just seeing him softening more, and I like to see it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it'll be interesting to see what that means and what his plans are and what his administration's plans are with these meetings. I think, as we've talked about over the last couple of years in separate discussions and on this platform, the U.S. is behind on building its relationships with the continent of Africa, right? China and Russia had made great strides during the first Trump term. throughout the Biden term. And then again, now you're seeing a lot of Russia-China relations with Africa expanding, right? China removing tariffs on African countries, Russia talking about eliminating debt with different African countries. So with all of those, that progress happening, I think the United States is behind, and everybody is rushing for Africa's mineral resources, right? Ideally, you know, we see Africa focus more on working with other countries on the continent to build these partnerships. But you know, they're already globalizing. They've already have been, and just expanding on it. And so the United States is just trying to catch up. And then the last is, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Joe. I forgot to add that the summit is supposed to be on July 9 at the White House. I don't know why they have to go to America, but whatever. It's gonna there are gonna be 5 countries: Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal.
Got it. I'm interested to see how the president of Senegal responds afterwards. He's been one that people have been watching very closely. Some are disappointed by him. Some people feel like may end up being a part of the AES. It's all still up in the air, so we will see. And then lastly, Ethiopia formalizes $3.5 billion debt restructuring.
Yeah, so Ethiopia is restructuring its agreement with international creditors, and this is basically to help with economic recovery. Of course, we know of a lot of the high rate of inflation, the pressure on the currency, the aftershocks of a brutal civil war. So by helping to ease this immediate repayment burdens, hopefully they're able to get some kind of lifeline, even though critics are warning that without meaningful economic reform and transparency, the relief may only be temporary, which I completely agree with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So we are at time. Unfortunately, I'd love to go deeper into other stories and would love to have spent more time responding to Roy Marshall and some of the other folks who have commented today. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I do have to head to another meeting. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the Gloria Ayo on YouTube, Authentic African on YouTube. Make sure you follow us across all platforms. We are everywhere. And so, yeah, just cross-pollinate, follow. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up to let the algorithms know that you like this content, and so that more people get a chance to see it. And do yourself and other people a favor by sharing this with anybody you know who's interested in what's happening on the continent in real time. We'll be back next Thursday. Same time, same place. Luckily, my meeting just got canceled, so I can spend a little bit more time. So we'll be back same time, same place. So make sure you join us. I will be going live again this Sunday on things pertaining to Sierra Leone, and I'll be going live again next Monday. Don't know what we're going to talk about yet, but we'll make sure to keep you guys abreast of what's happening sooner than later. Any other final thoughts from you, Gloria, before we go?
No, we just thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for all the feedback. Roy Marshall, you really were busy. Wish we had time to respond to your comments, but we thank you for joining us nonetheless, and for sharing your thoughts. Hi, Madam CJ Walker.
Yes. Hello. And thanks everybody for responding to the comments and responding to us with comments. I think we always appreciate the engagement. All right. And with that, guys, thanks for watching. We will see you all on the next live stream.
Bye.
Bye, guys.